an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage Errant Book 4, The Lost City of Ithos, chapters 39 through 43. The right moment to strike, from the clouds, the scene of the crime, warm and safe, and setting the stage. In these chapters, our friends come out the other side of this massive conflict, but Hugh really has some fucking scars, and we get a really amazing ending that truly delighted me. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode and also being very flexible when I had to reschedule. Appreciate you a lot, Dan. And this last section of the book is so jam-packed, and I'm going to be very careful about keeping time here because it's easy to get caught up, especially in this section. I feel like a lot of times when you try and talk about action sequences, it can be sort of and then he punched and then she but because we're dealing with really different mages here than we have seen before with powers and stuff and they're experimenting with things, I am always tempted to do a blow by blow when we get into some really cool sets, or set pieces. Yeah, I guess sequences. I don't know. You get what I'm saying, but I'm going to try not to do that so much unless it's truly plot relevant. And because there's so much, you guys. So we have the opening of chapter 39, and this, you guys, Talia is getting struck by arrows that are trying to grow into trees in her body. And honestly, I know that we have seen how fast these arrows can turn into trees, but I don't know why I didn't think about what it would be like for it to grow into a tree when it's punctured your body. That has to be more than half of the point of having these arrows do this, is so that you can tear your enemies apart. And not thinking about that aspect of it at all. I don't know what's the matter with me, but I was just sort of fascinated as if that part were a side effect and not the whole reason it's designed this way. So she is trying to find an area that is stable because she's at the top of this sort of tower area, and she winds up almost falling through and gets caught and is stuck in this really precarious position for a while. This whole Talia is growing to be a favorite of mine. It's really hard when you have these four characters, and I really love them all so much that I don't think I would have expected Talia to be so high on my list, because there was a sort of sense of her overcompensating, or at least trying to keep up a facade of total confidence all the time, and being leaning into the barbarian thing all the time. And I understand the appeal of that, but I also can find it sort of tiresome. And so the fact that Bierce lampshaded that with a conversation that she had with Sabe, I think it was at the dance, because of the way Talia was behaving, and Talia admitting that she just sort of decides to lean into it a lot of the time. And the fact that we have gotten to be in Talia's head and see how unsure of herself she is, and how much more willing recently she has become to acknowledging that she is insecure about some things. There are some people who, so I'm going to do a metaphor here, and please, sometimes metaphors don't carry out to the end. So I'm not trying to like guarantee that this metaphor is going to work the whole time, but we're going to start with this. So when you're very small, let's picture your like internal mind and emotions as a house. And when you're very small, you have really big emotions and you have a studio apartment to hold them all. And it's tight and difficult. And as you get older, you are sometimes shown how to build additional rooms. And sometimes you're not. And you just have to like slap rooms on because it's just needs must. And over time, depending on how much guidance you have on managing your emotions, those rooms will be more or less stable and helpful and dependable. And there are people who have more rooms than others because they have begun to realize like things don't always fit in just these two rooms. I need to build another one to hold some more complicated stuff. And there are people who have a sort of temper like Talia does, and who have a tendency towards violence as a solution for everything, like Talia does. And they have the one room for that particular emotional, like, set. And they don't see the need for anything else. But Talia is understanding that she is hurting some people that she actually cares about with that attitude, and that she needs to build another room to hold feeling like I want to be violent or feeling angry and not acting on what I'm feeling immediately without thinking. And that's, that's a room that I think a lot of people could benefit from, is like any emotion. There should be a place that you can set the ones that are valid. You're feeling them and they are real emotions, but they are maybe not trustworthy emotions. And you need a place to put them where they can safely exist, but they are not going to influence your actions too much, and they are not going to hurt anybody else. And that's the thing when people talk about like, well, your reaction to XYZ is valid. When you say valid, a lot of people think what you mean is that it is reasonable or justified that you feel XYZ kind of way. But valid doesn't mean that. Valid just means the fact that you feel that is real, and you should acknowledge that very real emotional reaction. Not that it is true and that you have a right to be as angry at somebody as you're feeling. The fact that you're angry, that's valid. You get to have an emotion. But is that a reasonable response when you take a moment and step back and look at the way you're interpreting things? Valid and correct or reasonable or compassionate, those are not all the same thing. So what I'm really enjoying about Talia is how much he is taking this like very typical barbarian character type and making her a lot more willing to explore other avenues of expressing herself in a way that doesn't take anything away from her viciousness or her enjoyment of battle. I feel like enjoyment feels like a weird word, but like that's I think a very accurate way to say that. So yeah, the whole thing that she's dealing with here is making her way through this sort of collapsing area and seeing Hugh and Godric and wanting to like run over to help them, but knowing that she has her own shit to do and she has to trust them, that they are going to be able to handle themselves. And later on, there is a conversation with Arthur where he's talking about everybody's roles in the group and what is Talia's role. And here she is reminding herself, without realizing this is what she's doing, she's not the protector. She's not the defender. And she has her own job. So, the whole situation here with her dealing with Grovebringer ends with her destroying something. Now, it's a living bow. This is Grovebringer, the actual item, right? She began manufacturing dream wasps as fast as she could. She kept it up for a count of 3, watching tiny plumes of multicolored smoke and the like rise from the holes she was leaving in the roof, then dove aside to cover in case she missed. No return fire arrived, and Talia carefully levered herself up to look. And she's looking, and she sees it's Grovebringer, and then there is a human body that has been completely mangled. And she's looking at Grovebringer, and she's like, uh-oh, because it is beginning to basically like smoke and spark the way that something that's gotten, its circuits crossed would do. It says, destroying powerfully enchanted items was generally considered a very, very bad idea. And she may have just damaged Grovebringer irreparably. Yeah. So this doesn't go super well. So then we jump over to Hugh. And this is awful, you guys. What we come up with, first of all, is again that Godric is going to have to sacrifice one of his hammers. And it's the one that's got a tiny bit of sentience, and he, like, later on can feel it sort of fighting back, and he feels a weird guilt around this, which I really appreciate that being acknowledged, because granted, Hugh says it's got about the sentience of like a snail. So it's not something that's hugely aware, but it is a living thing in its way. And that is rough. So Hugh wasn't sure when he started hearing the rumbling noise over the sound of the ash, but it grew steadily louder and louder until he realized the ground beneath their feet was shaking. And he's looking around, and then him and Godric realize there is something coming through the stone. And it is a tree, a massive deformed pillar, as though some mad archmage had jammed 1,000 different trees into one. Then the ground beneath the two of them crumpled, and they were hauled skyward by the rising branches of the new tree. Oh boy. So Alustin, meanwhile, is looking over and sees this all happening and is like, what the fuck? And immediately is like, this has to be Talia. Like, whenever some shit goes wildly wrong, I'm betting it's her involved. And then we jump to Sabe, and she is inside Archer's armor, which is not awesome for her. It's like there's nothing to hold on to. She's just kind of being like thrown around as he moves. And of course he's being attacked. So every time he gets hit with something, it shakes and she gets sort of thrown to the ground. And he's explaining to her that like they are really outnumbered at the moment. And that his suit is not intended for a long fight like this is turning out to be, and that he is running out of mana, which when we find out like just how big his reservoirs are, that's quite intense that he has gone through all of his mana. And then we go to Godric. You guys, this is so rough for me because y'all saw my reaction to hearing about shards of glass in the volcanic ash, and he has a moment where he turns and sees Hugh coughing and immediately is like, oh, something's really wrong. And I was like, no. And it's like what is so rough about this moment is that he sees that Hugh is horrifically burned. He can hear his breath rasping. He can tell Hugh is in really bad shape and wants to do something. And just as he's sort of coming over to like help Hugh, he feels with his affinity senses that there's somebody coming up behind him, and he chucks his hammer, which is a ring at the moment, at her. And it seems like she's dead, right? I'm pretty sure that like, because it creates this huge frozen area. I don't know. Maybe it says that there was no sign of her. So maybe she's not dead. Maybe she just got away. But either way, the whole thing begins to like fall apart after he's distracted for this moment and like throws it. And he has just started to realize how bad Hugh is. They get separated and Hugh winds up falling. And well, they both wind up falling, but he manages to sort of land in a spot and like it's not too far for him and he can't tell what happened to Hugh. And it's a while before they end up finding him. Like everything has to wrap up before they're able to locate him. And I was genuinely really upset and like anxious about this because that inhaling that volcanic ash, it's one thing to be burned on the outside. There's something about a superficial wound like that I know is horribly painful and can kill you. Don't get me wrong. Like burns can still do a number on you, even if you're not dead immediately. But him inhaling that stuff, that really is scary. And that was the thing that I was kind of like, can they undo that? Like, and it turns out that it seems there's going to be lasting damage. It's not something they can just heal, you know. It seems they were able to get it out of his lungs, but what it did to him is not easily undone, and that is a real bummer. I hate that for him, but I'm getting ahead of myself as I do. So Talia wakes up and she has another concussion. She is woken up by lightning strikes. And she's realizing like, oh, right, Grovebringer, because she can't remember what even happened. And this is when she realizes that she is hanging from her belt and like from one of the tree branches. And she can see and she's like conscious, but she has to sort of take a moment and recover while just hanging, which she's also like spinning in place, and with the combination of spinning in place plus having the concussion, like this is all making her feel like she's going to throw up over and over again. She does throw up a couple times, but it's like, you know, she has to work to get herself together again. And when she finally manages to like locate her friends, the first one she sees is Arthur, and his armor has taken such a beating that she is pretty sure he is not alive. And that's also like when we were in Godric's POV, he is pretty sure his dad is dead. Like the reaction they're both having is there's no way he survives that. And personally, I was not worried. And that's not to say that I don't think something could happen to Arthur, because I really do think something could happen to Arthur, actually. Like, he feels like a prime candidate for a character that you would really feel the loss of acutely, but who wouldn't necessarily like undo the whole direction your story is going. So there wasn't like, it's not to say that there isn't a part of me that sort of thought, well, I guess it's possible that he could die. But because we had him with Sabe, there was something about her being with him that made me trust, yeah, if he goes, then she goes, and I don't see Sabe being killed off. I just didn't think it was likely. But the two of them are really convinced. So yeah, she just like, her section ends with her literally just hanging there and deciding to like come to terms with the fact that that's what she's got to do. And then we go to everybody like kind of finding each other again. And Archer is demanding whether Godric is okay. And he says that he is, but he can't tell where Hugh is because his book is keeping him from being scryed, which I don't really know why it's continuing to do that at this point. I'm assuming that the Havathi must have somebody who can scry them, and so it's meant to be like a countermeasure, but it feels that in an emergency situation like this, it probably would be good to like turn that off, you know? I don't know. But anyway, Archer says, this is when she says something, I'll need days to fill my mana reservoirs. And Sabe is like, what? Mine'll be done in like an hour or two. And I'm like, yeah, girl, well, he's got like an Olympic-sized swimming pool and you have a bathtub. That's the sense I have. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And basically what it comes down to is, well, we're just going to have to rely on good old human tricks and not magic because we don't have it in us. And this is when Sabe notices that the canals, which I had mentioned, like she noticed them being laid out in a weird kind of way. She notices this time that they are spell forms and they're meant to be like part of the defense of the city, which I thought was really cool. So, oh, sorry, Dan's in the chat. Hey, Dan. He says kablooey. Another thing for Bierce, injuries aren't just waved off like serious emotions either. Yeah, which I do really appreciate because that shit adds up, man. Even with magical healing, I mean, that's the thing is like, I really understand the temptation as a writer, if people can be healed from something, to have it be total so that they're back at complete capacity. So that you can write from that place. But I think it's more interesting if people have to cope. Because that shit is real. You know? And then Dan says, waiting to name the book until book 5 was definitely a mistake. I don't know what you mean, Dan. I'm confused. Sorry. I'm waiting to name this book or sorry, Dan, I'll wait for you to reply. I'm going to move on, but I'll come back when you reply. So this Godric, we jump to him trying to find Hugh. And, this is when he sees signs that Kandaron is here. And Kandaron is really pissed. It is this intro to Kandaron as a, what's the word I want to say? Warrior feels inadequate, frankly. But this is really impressive. And Kandaron was already impressive. So there is a feeling here of really like, oh, you done fucked up. And Sabe calls the expression on Kandaron's face wrath, which that's not a word that is used often enough, but it's good. Wrath. And Sabe realizes there was a dragon approaching a second ago. Wait, where is it? The remains of the dragon had crashed into the city far short of the collapsed tree. If Sabe hadn't known what it was already, she never would have identified it as a dragon. It barely even resembled meat. Ooh. Oh, God. Dan says you don't just have to call the spell book forever. Oh, I see what you're saying. So this is one of my favorite things about being like the spoiled one, is watching how somebody has to navigate talking about something when they don't fully know what it actually is. And so your conversations with spoiled people are going to sound either really different or maybe be on like something that this unspoiled person wouldn't even understand. And this sounds like it's falls kind of under that category. So that's fun. It evidently the name that Talia comes up with that the book starts answering to is Mackerel. I am hoping that isn't the name we stick with. However, I'm not going to lie. If it's shortened to Mac, I'm not going to be mad about that. You know, like that's not a terrible name. It's a weird name for a book, but I'm not exactly mad about it. But anyway, so Candaron comes to a halt. She's looking around, and there are a bunch of like dragons and people who are like, oh shit, and they're getting ready, but they are not initiating the attack. And then we have a Lustin, and Sabe looks over at him and sees this look on his face that later on she has a conversation with Lustin where she is like, all right, man, look, I gotta be square with you here. You fucked up with this whole thing. And I'm going to give you another chance, but I cannot deny my intense doubts over the fact that you seem to be prepared to do anything you need to do to take these guys down. And that includes sacrificing us. And I need you to like acknowledge that that is something you're prepared to do and cope with that and decide whether or not you are prepared to like really go through with it when you are able to stop and consider it in a real way that's detached from the moment and your desire for vengeance. Because if you are going to walk this path and keep being prepared to sacrifice us, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I can't. And it's unfair of you to ask it of us if you give any shits about us, which you claim to do. And that's sort of the thing here is like she sees this expression on his face, and it's, you know, he is so like collected so much of the time, but he has clearly lost control of himself for a moment, and she gets a glimpse of just how intense his emotions about this are. And I love this woman, Valia. You shouldn't be here. And yet I am. This is a violation. And Candaron doesn't say anything. And Valia finally is like, would you really have the audacity to come back here and break your word at the scene of your crime? Yes, Candaron said. There was a long, drawn-out silence at that. I enjoy this the most. I love it so much. I stan a queen who can admit she is doing some shit that on paper is fucked up. You know, just being like, yeah, this is problematic. And yet here I am. So, and just wait. This will be the end of our treaty if you go through with it. And Candaron says, nothing would please me more than if your masters were to end this treaty. It would solve so many problems for me. Moreover, you've done me quite the service and shown me how little your masters trust even their most loyal servants with full knowledge of the treaty's contents. Oh, really? I mean, she was like a second away from mentioning Heartburner, I swear to God. Candaron's wings grow. She growls for a moment, but it goes away pretty quick. And then she is just towering and says, leave. Which they do. They do indeed. I just really, what a moment. Love it. It's the end of the battle. And she winds up scooping up the exile splinter and taking it, which is the like reasoning behind what Havathi is thinking is going to happen later. But we find out that was not actually what she intended. Now she's saying it's not. I really want to believe her. And the conversation that she has with Hugh feels genuine. But, I've been burned before. So I want to believe you, Candaron. I really do. But wheels within wheels, my friend. I don't know. We'll see. And Dan says, Candaron is a badass. Book 7 is great, by the way, so you can look forward to a good ending, too. Did it drop already? Oh, shit. I don't know why I thought that it was June that it dropped. Okay, nice. You read that shit fast. All right. So... Let's see. One of the librarians Errant was carrying Talia, who looked shockingly tiny and frail. She had apparently been injured and dangling from her dagger in midair for some time. And then they organized their search party for Hugh. I really appreciate this moment. Talia didn't deny or rage or insist on going to search for Hugh. To Sabe's dismay, Talia just seemed to fold in on herself. That is it's just such an evocative way to put it. And you know exactly what it means. I feel like we all know when this is what we're doing. And we know when we're seeing people we care about do it. And the fact that Talia is so gut punched at this, that she isn't engaging in any of her usual fight through it behavior, really speaks to the level of attachment that she has for Hugh. And I hate this for her, even though I know he winds up being found. I don't even want to say we find out he's okay. He's not okay. He is found and they're treating him, and he's going to, get back up to most of his capacity. But it's later on when I think we're in her POV or Sabe's, I can't remember. One of them says something about how they had been told it would be bad, but they didn't think it was going to be this bad. So that's what we're working with. And it turns out that his book saved him, and it did, in saving him, break his wrist, I think. Because it had to grab him and hold him as he was dropping, which, that's a lot of weight that you're just putting on this one joint. So it did some damage, but it slowed him enough that even though he broke some ribs when he landed, it was enough to save his life. And I love this. When they arrived at the room, Hugh's spellbook lurked in front of the door, its pages opened menacingly in their directions. If it could make noise, Sabe was sure it would be hissing at them. The leather strap Hugh used to hang it over his shoulder had broken in half and hung loosely to either side. Talia strode forward without even hesitating, then crouched in front of the spellbook. It raised its cover menacingly at her. You finally got the whole apology gift idea right. You brought Hugh back to me. The book slowly closed its cover and seemed to shudder. You did good, she said, and gently stroked its spine. You did good. Everyone here is Hugh's friend. No one's going to hurt him. You guys, this was so precious. I just love this so much. Because, I was bummed that she and the spellbook, who is Hugh's sort of right hand at this point, did not get along. You don't want your significant other and your assistant to be at loggerheads all the time. And now they're friends. And I'm just very glad. So it's Sabe. She sees Hugh, realizes how bad it is. The healer orders them out after they really, it's clear they're having trouble handling this. And as they walk out, she is ready to scream at Alustin. And when she turns around to do it, she sees he's already got a very guilty expression on his face, and he knows this shit is his fault. And he says something about how It's frankly astonishing that you all survived. And she says, yeah, well, we'll see. Like, he may not, bruh. And he acknowledges that's possible. And he says, if you want me to find you a new master to be apprenticed to, I will help you find one. And this is when she tells him that she hasn't expressed to the others what was going on with the, like, coup that happened at Skyhold. And when he asks why, she's like, because everybody, like, looks up to you and sees you as a figure to be admired and trusted. And frankly, I don't want to take that away from them, because I think you actually do care. But you seem willing to do some shit, you know? And I'm going to give you a second chance. But I also have to acknowledge, and this is really interesting. She says, you've done a lot for us. You saw something in us and brought it out, and nobody else was willing to, like, invest time in us, and we are becoming something because of that. And we probably, you know, would have agreed to this if we were told what risks were in play. We probably likely would have done it anyway. So I'm not even saying that, like, bringing us here was unfair. The thing that I'm having trouble with is that we're being used as pawns. But I wasn't mad about the fact that you used pawns. I was mad at the fact that you used us as pawns. But my brain was completely willing to accept that pawns are a necessity. So I'm being kind of hypocritical here, where I'm acting like, well, this is, like, contemptible that you've done this, when I've got to admit that, considering how my mind works, I'm just basically being like, well, why don't you make somebody else a pawn? Which is a fucked up place to be coming from. And I thought that was kind of a compelling, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I just really found that interesting. The idea that you can, and this is sort of a thing to keep in mind with everything. I remember there being some people that were going through some shit talking to a friend of mine, and they said, like, I just can't believe that this is happening to me. And my friend saying, well, why not you? Like, you know that this happens to people, but it always happens to other people, right? But it doesn't happen to you because you're special. And it only happens to side characters. Can you stop and think about that for a second? And, like, what a fucked up place that is to be, to really think that you should be the exception to things because you're the main character. Like, that, you don't have plot armor, my friend. This shit is just life. And that really kind of hit me, you know? And especially considering how much we know about Sabe and her ways of thinking politically, the fact that she can acknowledge that, yeah, sometimes you just gotta play games. And that is what I am also prepared to do. So there are going to be folks who wind up as my pawns, probably. Like, she doesn't say that, but it feels to me like where she's going with this in a way. I appreciate her having that self-awareness and acknowledging to herself that, like, ideally, yeah, we wouldn't have to handle things this way, but we live in a world where that's necessary. And do you want to do your part or not? And what does doing your part in this case entail? Because if it is being sacrificed, maybe not. But yeah, for all the sheer madness of Alestin's vendetta against the Havath, at least he had a purpose. What did Sabe had? She'd never been a proper Candace Storm Mage, but she'd never truly sought out a goal after that. She'd just gone with the tide, rather than try and swim in her own direction. No matter how much power she earned, that on its own wouldn't free her or her friends from being used as pawns by others. It was having a purpose that turned you from a pawn into a player, and she didn't have one. Maybe it was time for that to change. And I'm just like, oh, word? Like, we're about to see Sabe starting her own little game here? I'm here for it. So we jump over to Talia, and we find out just like how intense Hugh's injuries are, and that it's going to be a while before he is in a better place health-wise. Once the Havathi had all left, the librarians Errant had spent several hours scouring the city, mainly recovering some of the sacred swordsman's weapons and Ithonian artifacts. During that time, the storm finished passing over Ithos. You know what? Really quick, you guys. I don't know if this is something that is included in text at the end of the printed book or the ebook, but at the end of the audiobook, there is an afterword by John Bierce, and he narrates it, and he calls the city Ithos. And that is not how the audiobook narrator says it. And I really don't like Ithos as much as Ithos. So I'm going to keep calling it Ithos, but I do want to acknowledge that according to the actual author, that is not how it's pronounced. So I just want to say that. But anyway, Kandaron spent the entire time crouched in the central plaza, staring at the exile splinter as if entranced, which we find out later is probably her attempting to get some of her memories back. And she winds up taking it, but she isn't planning on using it, ? Like, supposedly? I don't know. So she sees Hugh too, Kandaron, and she's real displeased. She has a very strong reaction. She obviously like cares about Hugh more than I think I thought she did, if I'm telling you the truth. But Dan says, Hugh's injuries are what make me consider this book the end of this series being young adult. Yeah, I see that. It's Ithos. Yeah, but it's not. Like, I mean, I'm going to keep it with Ithos. I like it. But apparently it's not. Which I wish he had like more in that afterword where he says the other characters' names. But the afterword is not about that. It's about tigers. So I was like, well, if he got that wrong, what other name pronunciations did he get wrong? And I really especially want to hear his pronunciation of Alustin, because you guys know that I was starting it off with Aliston, and I still kind of like Aliston because it just sounds so close to Allison, but then it ends in a surprise. But maybe that's like also completely wrong. Alustin's, how does he say it? But anyway, okay, so we have the convo between Godric and Talia, where they each try and claim that it is their fault. And this is interrupted by Arthur talking about the roles that they each play in the group, and that they should really focus on that more. And also, he tells Godric basically, like, you're never going to be a solo fighter the way that I am. You are a team player. So you can't do it all. That's not going to be the position that you hold. And yeah, he says something too about how like Hugh maybe over relies on words. And I was like, don't let him hear you say that, bruh. And he says to Talia, if you're the heavy hitter, why do you keep talking as though it's your job to defend the group? And to Godric, you're not the one protecting. You're the lightning rod. You attract the attention of the enemy and hold that attention. And Godric's like, well, doesn't Sabe do that? And he says, she does that some, yes. But she's the leader, really, of the group. And she's also the flanker for you when you're performing that role. So I was excited that we're all just going to acknowledge that Sabe is the leader of the group because, like, yeah, obviously. Come on. Let's see. Godric waited for Talia to get out of earshot and then broached a question he'd been meaning to ask for a while. I'm never going to be as powerful as you are, am I? And Archer says, well, you're not, because I have some, like, inherent shit that you don't have. Massive, massive mana reservoirs. Mine were so much bigger than yours are at your age. And also, I have my iron affinity, which so many of the, like, specialized things that I can do are specifically due to that, which you don't have. But I really want you to, like, focus on doing your own thing, because you know I'm proud of you. It's not about matching what I do. You have got to figure out your own thing. And that's not to say that you won't be able to, like, be extremely powerful in your way. You're just not necessarily going to be able to do what I do. And he's then, as he's walking away, he says, oh, and I think your name should be Godric Hammerbreaker. And poor Godric is like, fine. He's, like, really not happy about it. So this is when we go to chapter 42, Warm and Safe. And Hugh wakes up with these bad injuries, and he is on Kandarin's paws, or on her foreleg. And she's looking down at him, and they have a conversation about what happened. And I really, really appreciate that he asks her the questions that were raised by the Havathi, who was saying that Kandarin had her own ulterior motives for things and yada yada. Like, I was worried that he would just sort of keep his doubts to himself and let them simmer, but he just decides to fucking communicate. And oh my God, how very refreshing, I have to say. So let's see. Here it is. He asks what she's going to do with the exile splinter first. I'm not intending to use it again, if that's what you're asking. The risk of attracting the cold mines is too high. At midwinter, when the Skyhold's vault can next be opened, I will seal it away within. And I'm like, oh boy, how long is that? Because I feel like I want that gone a lot sooner than this. But I appreciate it being mentioned that, like, destroying enchanted objects is so dangerous, because otherwise I would be like, well, just can't you fucking, like, get rid of it? And he asks, so the way that you decided to seal off Ithos the way you did, like, that was fucked up. Don't you think? Like, weren't there other ways to do that? She says, possibly. Ithos was one of the best defended great cities ever to exist. But we were really desperate. And this is when Kirsad accused you of just wanting to perpetuate the system of great power. And she's actually, like, in this moment, very thoughtful about her response. And is like, look, I'm not trying to say I have always been perfect. What she is accusing me of isn't untrue, but it's kind of like the way I used to move. And it's not really anymore. I have certainly been kind of power hungry. I have opposed them for the sake of it at times, and have really wanted to, like, pretend things were, like, for moral purposes, when really it was because I wanted what I wanted. But at this point, I truly believe that what we're doing is the right thing, and that Ithos can't be allowed to return, that there is, like, a stability that I need to foster. And she talks about the liches and how she, like, sponsors new liches, and she really vets them before she decides to sponsor them, and keeps an eye on them to make sure that they are caring for the people that they take into their domains. And if they don't, she could just like undo them in whatever, take that however you want. So she's like, you know, everything that people accuse me of, I'm not even going to pretend there isn't some validity to all that. But I've been alive a really long time. And to a point, we all fuck up. We all grow. We all begin to see the bigger picture, hopefully. And those things they say are not all I am. They are certainly part of me, and I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect. But I believe I'm not who they think anymore. And honestly, you know, I've said before how leery I was of Candoron, but that response is believable to me. I still kind of have my eye on her a little bit. I don't think that's a bad thing, but as somebody who feels like she has changed really dramatically in only the last 10 years, I can't imagine the changes you go through when you have lived as long as Candoron does. You know, like the type of person that I used to be and who I am now, there's just no connection almost at this point. It feels like the actions of a different person, where I can like vaguely remember why I did what I did and the feelings I was having when I did it. And I can sort of be like, okay, I guess this was the mindset I had. But from the viewpoint I'm in now, I can't believe I did it the way I did, you know, I'm just like, wow, that was a really bad call. So yeah, when he asks, why did you do it? She says revenge, and she had a mate who got blinded in an attack and they killed her child. And she talks about her daughter and how much her daughter meant to her, and is like, you know, it's been a really long time and that shit is extremely painful even now. And talks about how a lot of them, like, they didn't realize exactly what they were getting into creating the exile splinter, but people died, including her mate. And she's like, the empire was so awful, though, that I think if people went into it knowing that they were going to die, they would have done it anyway, because that was just how willing we were to do whatever needed doing to get it down. And then we find out that one of the prices she paid is her memories of like the name of her mate and her daughter. And that broke my heart, you guys. That was really rough. She can remember so much about them, but she can't remember what their names were. And she thought maybe getting the exile splinter back and using that, she could get the memory back, and she hasn't. And she's like, honestly, if I had been able to just get my memories back, maybe that's fucked up. Like, maybe you have to pay a price that stays paid for it to count. And I did what I needed to do, and maybe it wasn't the best way, but I still believe that it was the right thing to do. And it's just this, like, you know, a trade-off that she made. And I'm like, I think I would rather have the memories of moments with them than their names. But not knowing their names, that is like a real particular twist of the knife, you know? Dan says, I left a religious cult at 32. People can change, but it's not always common, and it tends to be huge things. Yeah. And it's like, people can change, I think, beliefs. But changing a lot of like the ways that we live and our patterns, that may be harder. So I feel like I can believe that Candoron is working for better moral goals now, but that does not mean that she isn't still just as sort of ruthless as she has ever been. You know, that's kind of the difference, is like, I have always been somebody who is highly opinionated and kind of aggressive about that. And I just had very different opinions 10 years ago. But the vibe I carry regarding that is the same. So anyway, then we have this like long scene that ends in just basically that Candaron is purring. I really appreciated that. She's like caring for Hugh and calls him little one. And I was like, oh my God, she's calling him little one. So then we go to 43, setting the stage. Duarc Icola was in a truly vile mood. And, you know, after this whole thing and the loss and whatnot, they are really kind of flipped out. Because they still see Candaron as the person that she was. And again, I really want to emphasize, I don't think she is, but I can't blame them for thinking she is. I mean, you know, and Candaron could not be trusted with the exile splinter. She could not be given a chance to crush the dream of a better future for the Ithonian continent, for Anastas itself. The Havathi Dominion existed to bring prosperity, to end the reign of fear and uncertainty that the selfish, feuding great powers brought to Anastas. And I have to admit that there's some like description of Havath that I'm sort of thinking doesn't sound too bad. Now, of course, we're seeing it through the eyes of somebody who is in power and maybe doesn't actually see the reality of the picture or is self-deluded, perhaps. But we find out like that they take care of their people. They keep things clean. Everybody is fed. And there are still slums. That's my question, is just like, well, what's that about? But people aren't like living in poverty exactly, which feels pretty good to me. But I don't know. And then it says she could not be allowed to ruin yet another proving ground for the multiverse, which I don't know what that means, because there's at first I was thinking like, does she mean something about the cold ones, or the cold mines? But I don't know what that means. Proving ground? Like, what do you mean? Oh my God, you guys, I'm so sorry. Hold on one second. This is my vet calling. All right. So those of you who are only listening, I just got a call from the vet with some rough news about Sam. And so I have been crying a little bit, so I sound different, and I'm really sorry. But there it is. I'm going to move on because I pretty much finished like the area of the Havathi. They're going to try and get the thing from Candaron, and I'm not sure that they really get who she is. And I'm wondering if that can be like overcome. But based on what the Havathi have done to Alustin, I'm going to say probably not. And the last section that we get that I mentioned in the intro was like I really enjoyed is basically Bierce for me sounds like he was going, all right, so I mentioned the cold mines. They were a whole thing. And because they can't be beaten, I don't want to have them be a thing, but I also can't just like let that go. So what am I gonna do? And what he decides to do is have us be in the POV of somebody that he just calls the Heir, H-E-I-R, which I'll tell you what, it took me a while in listening to the audiobook to understand that was the like version of the word, because for a minute I just kept taking it as A-I-R and I was extremely confused. But he is the heir is what is left after the Havathi, or not Havathi, the Ithonians like slowly die away. And eventually the heir is like the last one. And there's a lot of like horrible descriptions of huddling up to each other for warmth, but, you know, not wanting to fall asleep so that they might kill you and eat you. Like the whole thing. This is really, really rough. And eventually, the cold minds come to the heir and are like, hey, buddy, we could find a place for you. Because, you know, we're also very cold and just want to get warm and fed. And if you work with us, we could teach you what to do. So they are like seducing him into becoming this weird, like, consciousness separated from a body and finding a place to take over. And he decides to do it. And he steps out into Ithos and is about to be like, ha, here we come. And then he gets eaten by the Mage Eater. So they had been like about to do their thing. And by accident, he was killed by a tiger that had no real intention of like saving the world. But that is what she did. And I really love that. I love that so much as an ending, truly. And I'm just genuinely, I felt like that was really brilliant. I really did. So that's the end of the book. And then I mentioned the afterword he does about tigers, and he basically just explains like how much scarier tigers are than we think, and how they tend to eat people like exclusively or primarily when they have been injured in such a way that hunting for their normal prey is too hard, because their normal prey is a lot more dangerous than human beings. So because human beings are low-key pitiful, we're what they go after when they're like not up for it. And then asks folks to look into tigers and make some donations to preserving tigers. So that's his afterword. I don't know, it's pretty great. But I have got to wrap this up because I have to go and pick up my boy. Thank you so much, Dan, for commissioning this. And Dan also sent over a chunk of money to pay for the next book, but also like help me out with Sam. And thank you so much, Dan. That was really, really that was very sweet and also like so helpful. You don't even know. I just really appreciate it. And I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. Appreciate you all. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.